In this video, I have nothing but facts to show you. This is a crucial time to be alive and awake. Let's break it down.
This is a 13-second great moment of her just absolute being caught in a lie. It's wonderful.
There's one other topic I wanted to talk to you about, but let me just quickly put a button.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making. I'm not discounting the importance of the border.
Well, I mentioned it because I know Republicans have certainly come at you on this, but Democratic Congressman Cuellar has a border district has said to you and the president, come.
I care about what's happening at the border. I'm in Guatemala because my focus is dealing with the root causes of migration. There may be...
As we are adults, an answer is mandatory, but if we look at how she responds, not a word of sincerity is being given. In 1 minute, she has managed to show us two faces. You can see she is completely dodging the question, dodging you as an interviewer or individual unless she can manipulate the topic toward her vaguest interest. As she first opens her mouth to create a point, not one thought made sense. She threw 5 throwaways, to finally get to the point already at hand, to say she's been to the border. But now we can see what it takes to get a real response. She had to choose to submit to the object of the conversation, which she still slipped up on because it wasn't her intention to speak the truth anyway. Right after she gets fact-checked, she plays with the severity when the fact is that she's being called out on a lie. She throws out an insignificant fact as a distraction to completely deny realistic accountability, but then insists she understands the severity. This is the face of a liar and a puppet. Look at how she dances to avoid responsibility of a yes or no question. You cannot get any more bold-faced than this, while she's laughing because the irony is on us as Americans to have to call that out too. The reality is that she'll say anything because some people might just believe it anyway.
There may be some who think that that is not important, but it is my firm belief that if we care about what's happening at the border, we better care about the root causes and address them. And so that's what I'm doing.
I need to do more on that. Here's a tweet from Kamala. It's awful. It's just awful. This is from April 1st, 2017. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal. Yes, they are a criminal. If you're undocumented, you got here illegally, and legal is in the word illegally. So you are, by very definition,
I'll make it clear. Immigration is not illegal. There is a legal way to immigrate. There are documented immigrants and they are citizens because they are documented. The process of immigration requires documentation because we don't have the resources as a country to feed the unnamed. By this, any undocumented individual is criminal by law because you immigrated illegally into this country. It's astonishing that she is vice president of the country without a fundamental understanding of anything, but it'll make more sense once we realize that nobody voted for her to enter into this position. Let's break it down.
A quarter of registered voters still say they don't know you. They don't know what makes you tick. And why do you think that is? What's the disconnect?
It's an election bill. And I take it seriously that I have to earn everyone's vote. This is an election for President of the United States. No one should be able to take for granted that they can just declare themselves a candidate and automatically receive support. You have to earn it. And that's what I intend to do.
Let me tell you what your critics and the columnists say.
Okay.
They say that the reason so many voters don't know you is that you have changed your position on so many things. You were against fracking, now you're for it. You supported looser immigration policies, now you're tightening them up. You were for Medicare for all, now you're not. So many that people don't truly know what you believe or what you stand for. And I know you've heard that.
In the last 4 years, I have been Vice President of the United States, and I have been traveling our country, and I have been listening to folks and seeking what is possible in terms of common ground. I believe in building consensus.
But one issue that has proven impervious to compromise is immigration. Over the past 4 years, the Biden-Harris approach has been inconsistent, and Republicans are convinced immigration is the vice president's Achilles heel. You recently visited the southern border and embraced President Biden's recent crackdown on asylum seekers. And that crackdown produced an almost immediate and dramatic decrease in the number of border crossings. If that's the right answer now, why didn't your administration take those steps in 2021?
The first bill we proposed to Congress was to fix our broken immigration system, knowing that if you want to actually fix it, we need Congress to act. It was not taken up. Fast forward to a moment when a bipartisan group of members of the United States Senate, including one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, got together, came up with a border security bill. Well, guess what happened? Donald Trump got word that this bill was afoot and could be passed, and he wants to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. So he told his buddies in Congress, kill the bill, don't let it move forward.
But I've been covering the border for years. And so I know this is not a problem that started with your administration.
Correct.
But there was an historic flood of undocumented immigrants coming across the border the first 3 years of your administration. As a matter of fact, arrivals quadrupled from the last year of President Trump. Was it a mistake to loosen the immigration policies as much as you did?
It's a long-standing problem. And solutions are at hand. And from day one, literally, we have been offering solutions.
What I was asking was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
But the numbers did quadruple.
And the
under
numbers
your
today,
watch.
because of what we have done, we have cut the flow of illegal immigration by half.
But should you
we
have
have
done
cut
that?
the
Should you
flow
have
of
done that?
fentanyl by half, but we need Congress to be able to act to actually fix the problem.
You have accused Donald Trump of using racist tropes when it comes to Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, when it comes to birtherism, when it comes to Charlottesville. In fact, you have called him a racist and divisive. Yet Donald Trump has the support of millions and millions of Americans. How do you explain that?
I'm glad you are pointing these comments out that he has made that have resulted in a response by most reasonable people to say it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
With so many people supporting Donald Trump, a man you have called a racist, how do you bridge that seemingly unbridgeable gap?
I believe that the people of America want a leader who's not trying to divide us and demean. I believe that the American people recognize that the true measure of the strength of a leader is not based on who you beat down, it's based on who you lift up.
So she skipped primaries, but she's still running while calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy? How? Witness how people like this like to throw loose terms in your face which actually don't mean anything if you weren't born yesterday. The hypocrisy is crazy. If we take into account the fact that America was originally and still is a constitutional republic, then we can realize that we were never a real democracy and there is no real threat. Once we stop pretending that any of these lies are true, then we can stop acting like children and get this mess fixed. How anybody can be so bold-faced is crazy. Since Trump originally wanted the wall, what does it say now that we can't get it closed with this new administration? That immigration quadrupled once they entered office. It's as simple as 2 and 2. Now, what democracy could there be if your voter base are the new arrivals sold on a dream which Kamala herself said is dead? As we can see, she's almost completely incapable of answering straightforward questions, and when she does, it's with the wrong part of the script at the wrong time. It's astonishing that our grown men look up to someone who genuinely has nothing to offer but lies and propaganda. The question wasn't even asking her to admit that she was a problem, even though we know that she was appointed border czar. But she didn't even want to admit that she was late to act because that implies responsibility and the clear lack thereof. She's trying so hard to avoid the statistics that it only proves that she isn't unaware. There's just nobody home but the hand up her ass.
There are lots of signs that the American economy is doing very well. Better than most countries, I think. But the American people don't seem to be feeling it. Groceries are 25% higher, and people are blaming you and Joe Biden for that. Are they wrong?
We now have historic low unemployment in America among all groups of people. We now have an economy that is thriving by all macroeconomic measures. And, to your point, prices are still too high. And I know that, and we need to deal with it, which is why part of my plan, you mentioned groceries. Part of my plan is what we must do to bring down the price of groceries.
Harris says she'll press Congress to pass a federal ban on price gouging for food and groceries, but details are yet to be defined.
You want to expand the child tax credit.
Yes, I do.
You want to give tax breaks to first-time home buyers.
Yes.
And people starting small businesses.
Correct.
But it is estimated by the Nonpartisan Committee for Responsible Federal Budget that your economic plan would add $3 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade. How are you going to pay for that?
Okay, so the other economists that have reviewed my plan versus my opponent and determined that my economic plan would strengthen America's economy, his would weaken it.
But
My plan, Bill, if you don't mind, my plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes. It is not right that teachers and nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations. And I plan on making that fair.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about because their constituents know exactly what I'm talking about. Their constituents are those firefighters and teachers and nurses. Their constituents are middle-class, hardworking folk.
And Congress has shown no inclination to move in your direction.
I disagree with you. There are plenty of leaders in Congress who understand and know that the Trump tax cuts blew up our federal deficit. None of us, and certainly I cannot afford to be myopic in terms of how I think about strengthening America's economy. Let me tell you something. I am a devout public servant, you know that. I am also a capitalist. And I know the limitations of government.
Lie after lie after lie. Now you can all see the hypocrisy for what it is. The whole section speaks for itself. Let's move on.
This is Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. On September 11th, 2022, Harris sat down with Chuck Todd of NBC News, who asked her about the southern border.
I want to ask you about the border. Would you call the border secure?
I think that there is no question that we have to do what the President and I asked Congress to do. Is the first request we made. Pass a bill to create a pathway to citizenship. The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system, in particular over the last 4 years before we came in, and it needs to be fixed.
So the Biden-Harris administration has been in office for 20 months. And since the time Joe Biden took office, encounters at the southwest border spiked and have remained at record highs. From February 2021 to August 2022, there have been close to 3.6 million encounters at the southern border. But as per usual, Kamala Harris and the rest of the failure administration refuse to take responsibility for anything. Instead, they blame Orange Man Bad for a broken immigration system. Now, before we go on, and so that we're all on the same page, here's an explainer of some of those past and current policies. Under Title 8 United States Code Section 1325, any alien who enters or attempts to enter the United States at any time or place other than as designated by immigration officers is a criminal act. Violators can receive a sentence of up to 6 months in prison and shall be subject to a civil penalty of up to $250. This is all very straightforward stuff. If you cross the border illegally, you should probably be going to prison. However, there's some loopholes. Title 8, Section 1225 states that if the officer determines at the time of the interview that an alien has a credible fear of persecution, the alien shall be detained for further consideration of the application for asylum. Then there's Title 8, Section 1158 that allows any alien who is physically present in the United States or who arrives in the United States, irrespective of such alien status, to apply for asylum. So if a migrant is caught crossing the border, they can claim asylum or claim that they have a credible fear. But instead of following the law set by Congress and detaining these migrants, the Department of Homeland Security has the discretion to release migrants while they await hearings and interviews. This practice is called catch and release. But there's a problem. Only a small percentage of these migrants have a legitimate asylum or credible fear claim. The Republican Policy Committee wrote in 2021, out of every 100 people who claim credible fear at the border, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will find credible fear in 83 cases. Of those 83 cases, only 45 actually will end up applying for asylum, and only 14 are ultimately granted asylum. In other words, most migrants claiming credible fear and applying for asylum have a fake claim. The reality is that most migrants who cross the border are doing it for jobs and better economic opportunity.
Economic opportunity afforded by Biden and Harris, who won't close the border, who work endlessly to keep us ignorant, question after question. I was going to move on from here, but there's so much coming out, like this awful Fox interview. It's terrible, but we have to clear the nonsense. Somebody's got to. Let's break it down.
Madam Vice President, thank you for the time.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Brett.
You know, voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress before
We worked on infrastructure before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and they didn't bring up that bill. I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. That border bill would have put 1,500 more border agents at the border, which is why I believe the Border Patrol agents supported the bill. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States, which is a scourge affecting people of every background, every geographic location in our country, killing people. It would have allowed us to put more resources into prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of a border state.
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
Prosecuted trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
Six Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you,
but actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Brett.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungary's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss, sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in
her?
all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration, even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed. We need more. I was just down at the border talking with border agents, and they will tell you, and I'm sure you probably, I know you investigate and you are a serious journalist. They will tell you, we need more judges. We need to process those cases faster. We need the support for those cases that should be prosecuted. They need more resources, and Congress ultimately is the only place that's going to get fixed, Brett.
Well,
that's how this system works.
That's the premise of this question. There were 90-plus executive orders that were rescinded in the first days. Many of those were Trump border policies. I'm not going to stay here because there's other things to talk about, but you frequently talk to the Border Patrol Union for support of that bipartisan bill, and they did. They supported it. But they also just endorsed Donald Trump and said, you've been, quote, a failure with border security. Why do you think they said that?
I think they're frustrated, and I get it. They want support. They want support, and that's what that border security bill would have done. These guys down at the border, these men and women, they're working hard. They're working around the clock. I get it.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So decriminalizing border crossings, like you said in 2019.
I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as vice president. I will not do that as president.
So these are evolutions that you've had.
No, but let's be very clear. I'm the only person who's running for president who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations, from the Sinaloa cartel to the Guadalajara cartel to people who have trafficked in guns, drugs, and human beings. I have spent a significant part of my career going after people who present a threat to the safety of the American people and cross our border with the intent of doing us harm and cross our border illegally. And I will do that work as vice president. I take that work quite seriously.
This is a time when voters, especially here in Pennsylvania, are inundated with commercials and ads. They just want it to stop because it's every commercial. But many of them add noise, but a few of them seem to break through. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what? You got to take
during
responsible for what
his
happened in your
presidency.
administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in
So
black and white.
would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassessment
I will
surgeries?
follow the law, just as I
you have a
think
say
Donald
in
Trump would
this.
say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think it's he spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters because he actually has no plan in this election that is about focusing on the needs of the American people. Whereas, at $20 million on that ad, on an issue that, as it relates to the biggest issues that affect the American people, it's really quite remote. And again, his policy was no different. Look at where we are, though.
They say
on
it was
plans
different,
for the
but
American
we'll
people,
move on.
I'm offering a plan to deal with affordable housing. I'm offering a plan to deal with what we need to do to strengthen small businesses, which are the backbone of America's economy. I am offering a plan that is about taking care of young parents and giving them the support they need. My plans for the economy will strengthen the economy, as have been reviewed by 16 Nobel laureates, Goldman Sachs, Moody's, and recently the Wall Street Journal, which have all studied our plans and have indicated my plans for our economy would strengthen our economy, his would make them weaker,
Why do you
would
think more
ignite
people
inflation and invite a recession by the middle of next year. Those are the facts.
Why do you think more people say they trust him on the economy than they trust you?
I think that when you look at an analysis of our plans for what we would do as President of the United States, it has been clear to those who study and understand how economic policy works that moving forward, because I do believe the American people are ready to turn the page on the divisiveness and the type of rhetoric that has come out of Donald Trump. People are ready to chart a new way forward, and they want a president who has a plan for the future and a plan that is sound and will strengthen our country. My plan for the economy does exactly that. His plan would be, again, to give tax cuts to billionaires and the biggest corporations in our country and blow up our deficit.
It's interesting you said turn the page, Madam Vice President. You were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I noticed.
And so that would be one change in terms of... But also, I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So, you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders, including my plan for a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and for small businesses, extending the tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000.
We've heard a lot about those plans in recent days. Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American president, which is one who understands that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
that is
tell
about
pollsters,
turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people
exhausted.
tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever of
become.
power.
But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning and engaging in personal grievances and it being about him instead of the American people. People are tired of that.
If that's the case, why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Listen,
are they stupid? What is
God,
it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you...
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes. Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You call Donald Trump...
The significance
you
of that.
call Donald Trump... he's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment
and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And
but,
Donald Trump
but
is.
you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out. Even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again, including his former vice president, which is why the job was open for him to choose another running mate. So that is a fact. That is a fact.
Madam Vice President, two more things. You were asked on 60 Minutes about the biggest threat that the world faces, that the U.S. faces. This is what you said.
Which foreign country do you consider to be our greatest adversary?
I think there's an obvious one in mind, which is Iran. Iran has American blood on their hands, okay? This attack on Israel, 200 ballistic missiles. What we need to do to ensure that Iran never achieves the ability to be a nuclear power, that is one of my highest priorities.
A number of experts thought you would say China. The FBI director had said that. But you said Iran. If that's the case, what do you say to critics who look at the actions of your administration and say you're not acting like Iran is the #1 threat?
Well, I will tell you most recently, whether it was in April or in October, in the several hours on each occasion that Iran posed a threat to Israel, I was there. Most recently in the Situation Room, in the most recent attack, working with the heads of our military and doing what America must always do to defend and to support Israel in its requirement to defend itself, and to give American support to be able to allow Israel to have the resources to defend itself against attack, including from Iran and Iran's terrorist proxies in the region.
Right.
And that
but those proxies were getting funded by
my commitment to that is unyielding and unwavering.
Critics just say that you either relaxed or failed to enforce sanctions on Iran, allowing all of this money to flow into Iran, like billions.
Let's go back to Donald Trump, who pulled out of a deal that would have actually put Iran in check.
The estimates in billions.
And then it was during Donald Trump's
that
administration
go
that
the Iran regime
that we had an American military base that was attacked, where American soldiers suffered traumatic brain injuries, and Donald Trump dismissed them as headaches, not to mention how Donald Trump has treated and talked about America's military and military service people, calling them suckers and losers,
Hamas,
has diminished the significance.
We're talking over each other. I apologize.
Well, I would like that we would have a conversation that is grounded in full assessment of the facts, which includes, I think this interview is supposed to be about the choices that your viewers should be presented about this election, and the contrast is important.
Yes, ma'am.
And on the subject of Iran, I am offering what should be an important contrast that is presented for folks to make a decision
and there are critics
that they feel
who look at what the administration did and say and think differently. Madam Vice President, they're wrapping me very hard here. I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things
There's more to say. I have much more to say,
There are a lot of things that people want to learn about you and your policies, and that's why we invited you here.
I invite everyone to go to KamalaHarris.com, and you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be
accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
And that's why
intend
we
to do to
invited you
strengthen
here,
our economy,
to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
support America's military and ensure we have the most lethal and best fighting force in the world.
Madam Vice President,
And
they're giving me a hard rap
well,
here.
I thank you for the time.
I thank you for the time.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
When she left, how was her campaign? How was she to you when she left?
Yeah, I mean, it's cordial, and I said thank you so much, Madam Vice President, for the time. She said thank you. Her people, like probably 4 people, were wrapping me, with big, moving arms. That's why I looked out to the side and said, yeah. I've got to wrap up. You want to keep talking, you want to keep asking questions, but they were very animated. And listen, I hope she comes back. I actually think this is a different take. I think she had a mission that she wanted to do, and maybe she wanted to have a viral moment. She wanted to have a pushback. She came to Fox News and she wanted to have a go after Donald Trump viral moment that plays on a lot of other channels and on social media. And I think she may have gotten that. I think in the interim, we had a good exchange. I wish it wasn't so much filibuster. I wish it was just a cordial conversation about policy and follow-ups. Maybe if we had more time, maybe she'll come back. I don't know. I don't know if she will or not, but I hope she does. And obviously, I hope the former president does the same format.
Great job, Brett. That was terrible. You nailed it. And I think I already made the points I wanted to. The manipulation is clear, and I'm happy with that. Now we can get into the crises and damage. This is going to be a bit of a dump. We got a lot of things to get through. Let's break it down.
Joe Biden was declared by his own party not fit enough to continue as the nominee, as you remember, in late July. But he was deemed fit enough to finish out the next 7 months of his presidency. But I'll be candid, he's failing at a geometric rate. So he slurs his word, he loses his train of thought, and then that problem is compounded because his vice president is running as the replacement, but the 14 million people voted in our primaries for Joe Biden, and suddenly within a 48-hour period, that primary vote was nullified, and the current Democratic nominee, our vice president, has never entered, much less won a primary. We've never had anything like that in our history, where a candidate has just been, I guess you would say, forcibly abdicated, and then another person was picked in like a 19th century process in a back room and never entered a primary, and the primary voters had no say whatsoever. And then that person, Kamala Harris, because Joe Biden is polling about 41% and about 56% negatively, she is running as a hope and change, a new way forward candidate. And that's, to answer your question specifically, that's even more confusing for Americans as well as people abroad, because she does not want to run on what his economic, social, military, foreign policy agenda has been for over 3.5 years. But in other words, she says she is going to make radical changes to the left. So that begs the question, well, why didn't you do it as vice president or influence the president? But more importantly, why don't you do it now? Because once you've announced your agenda and the president seems to be not fully engaged, you would have a wonderful chance to implement these very radical. We've never seen a candidate, I guess, since Richard Nixon tried it and failed, wage and price controls, a wealth tax, an increase in the federal income tax up to 40% in addition to what the states could charge, increased inheritance taxes. We don't know to the degree to which her metamorphosis is a 90-day phenomenon, because she is kind of, in the last 90 days, changed all of her positions on the border, on mandatory buying of guns from private citizens, to crime, to everything. So we're bewildered because the candidate who is the vice president, we don't know to what degree she agrees with Joe Biden, what degree she is sincere that when she renounced most of her prior hard left positions, is that a gimmick to get elected? And of course, then we've never had at the same time since Grover Cleveland a president who's trying to run for a third term, except for Franklin Roosevelt, but I mean with an interrupted third term.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. I mean, come on. Take a look at the record.
Sir, it was not 9%. Stop it with the 9%, because the more you say that, the more people don't believe what you're saying.
Look, I think what the American people care most about is the fact
truth.
that inflation.
The American people care about truth, Jared.
Hold on, Neil. Neil, this only works if you let me talk, okay?
You haven't answered my question. I've asked it 5 times, five ways.
The president was making the point that the factors that caused inflation were in place when he took office, and that's unequivocally true.
Right.
I take your point, and we can have we can go on all day back and forth on this. I think what matters today is, are we making progress on lowering costs as well as lowering inflation? You know, they're not the same thing. Lowering both inflation and costs on behalf of the American people. I think we saw a great CPI report yesterday in that regard, but that's just one data point. No victory laps, no getting too far over the skis there.
The trend is your friend, and other economists agree with you that it looks like it could be, and the Federal Reserve might have some flexibility to cut rates.
Correct.
I had a guest on, you might have heard earlier, Jared, who was saying that would be a mistake. It would be.
President Joe Biden recently went on CNN and Yahoo Finance to talk about inflation and claimed it's dropped significantly during his time in office.
It was at 9% when I came in, and it's now down around 3%.
Several Verify viewers, including Laura, reached out to ask if that's true. So, Laura, let's verify. Our sources are the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the White House. When Biden took office in January 2021, year-over-year inflation was about 1.5% and began sharply rising until June 2022, when it reached 9%. Since then, it's dropped to around 3.5%. A White House spokesperson didn't dispute the figures and told Verify the president was making the point that the factors that caused inflation were in place when he took office. So, no, inflation was not 9% when President Biden took office in 2021. The White House blamed pent-up demand, the Russia-Ukraine war, and supply chain disruptions for the increase. With your Verify, I'm Brandon Lewis.
He's making the point that the factors that caused inflation to climb to 9% were in place when he took office.
No,
I think
that's
it was
not what he said. He said it was at 9%. It would eventually get to 9% a little over a year after that. But the fact of the matter is it wasn't 9%. So if I can't trust him quoting data in real time, why should I believe what he's talking about now?
And the answer is you shouldn't.
So the annual growth in core inflation in the second quarter of 21 was in fact about 9%. And his point about inflation down 60% off its peak is very much the case. So
no,
look,
it wasn't. It was not at that. So you're almost as bad as he is.
So for clarity, core inflation represents change in the costs of goods and services, excluding food and energy, because food and energy are the most volatile elements of the consumer price index. With that said, core inflation during the second quarter of 2021 was not remotely 9%. In fact, core inflation hasn't been higher than 6.6% during Biden's entire administration. In other words, Jared Bernstein is just making shit up. Not to mention that Joe Biden wasn't even talking about core inflation in the first place. The lengths that the Biden administration go to defend Joe Biden of all people is shameful and embarrassing. Sad, really.
Why can't you just say it was high, it got as high as 9%? You'd be accurate in saying that, and we have now brought it down and we're struggling in around the 3% area, but it's better than it was. But instead, to hang it on his predecessor that you inherited something that was through the roof when we were in the middle of COVID, it just seems to the American people, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're lying. Neil. You're just lying.
Well, hold on.
It was not 9%. Stop it with the 9%, because the more you say that, the more people don't believe what you're saying.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, I mean, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Since they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So, I don't think there's anything confusing there.
I just don't know how we fucked this up quite so much.
When did you start feeling so sorry for yourself? It's unbearable. What? So you think we might have put a few people out of business today? That's all for naught. But you've been doing that every day for almost 40 years, Sam. And if this is all for naught, then so is everything out there. It's just money. It's made up. Pieces of paper with pictures on it so we don't have to kill each other just to get something to eat. It's not wrong, and it's certainly no different today than it's ever been. 1637, 1797, 1819, 37, 57, 84, 1901, 07, 29, 1937, 1974, 1987. Jesus, didn't that fuck me up good? 92, 97, 2000, and whatever we want to call this. It's all just the same thing over and over. We can't help ourselves.
I just figured this out, but there's no time left for this to come out, so I have to say it. Jared Bernstein just said the government can and always is printing money, but that they also sell bonds as well as lend money. Well, how are the prices of bonds set if the money is itself being inflated behind these very closed doors? And how do you lend money as if you should get that back if you printed it the other day? This is fundamentally criminal, like how I can't print money because they'll get jealous and arrest me for life, then call me a threat to their national security. Well, what is a bond bonded to that you can sell it at all if you are printing a day's worth of new money every day? Any principal amount is hypothetical if we don't know how much money exists because we don't know how much value itself exists. Since money grows to stand more and more for nothing by the day, like George himself, how can we as people believe that any of this is in all fairness? The objective value of money is based on agreement, so how much money are they printing on a daily basis? Surely we can audit our government to find out. It wouldn't be the first time this has happened on Earth. So this is infinite money that Joe Biden's chair of economic advisors is talking about, yet that the country never sees, while taxes and high prices are apparently the scam being used to make it appear as if the government is collecting money. As most people are living paycheck to paycheck, this is unacceptable. The Biden and Harris administration has sucked America dry of its wealth to use for every purpose but America. Yet, Harris is still coming on daily ads to ask for what's left from what she couldn't get from the ad before. Considering the fact that Jared Bernstein is appointed by our current president, Joseph Biden, we have clear proof that regardless of the capacity to act, to print and provide money for all of us, the greatest interest of our government is not in the people. But if you can print your lunch, then I don't have to buy it. If you're going to print billions for Ukraine and Israel, why shouldn't I print billions for my country? And because this is a question, I don't want to see any of you suits at my door without an answer and $400 trillion. Your job is in my hands. Now, no, the entire Biden-Harris administration has been a disaster, while they deflect any and all criticism to make sure nothing ever comes to light, like the 100,000 missing immigrant children, hundreds by now, who were given pieces of paper with the name and location of a quote-unquote sponsor, then to the thousands still missing in Maui while the billionaires are shopping for homes there, to the mere hundreds of dollars FEMA gave for people to repair with during all of these recent catastrophes Americans have been through.
So if you were not mad, you're about to be enraged. Especially when you find out that FEMA lied. They said that they didn't have enough money to help the people from Maui, but they have a $25 billion budget to help them rebuild. They only send them $700. Aren't we paying for the hotels for all that people that are crossing the border, raping kids? And as a matter of fact, we're paying for their cell phones as well, but we couldn't do that for our brothers and our sisters already in this country. Now, the video you're about to watch is going to enrage you because you can really tell who's going to get the money and who's getting the money and who's using the money. And if they did it to Maui, they're going to do it to us.
The Four Seasons, FEMA agents are also posting up at the Fairmont Key Lani in Maui, where rooms range there from $1,300 to $4,500 a night. FEMA agents are also crashing at the Grand Wailea Astoria, 5 stars of course. Are these the hotels Biden's FEMA officials should be staying in, gallivanting around in and drinking in, as search and rescue operations are underway with 500 kids still missing? Now, FEMA has confirmed that they're staying at these hotels. Biden's giving Maui fire victims $700, while his FEMA officials sleep at luxury resorts that cost more than that per night. FEMA officials could stay at the Days Inn, where you could get an oceanfront view for $250 a night. We confirmed it. Rooms are still available there. Now, when did FEMA develop this taste for the finer things in life? Because FEMA's administrator, Deanne Criswell, is complaining that they don't have enough money.
I don't know. Yes, you do. How many children are missing? You know. The answer to that, I would be happy to answer that.
You have no estimate as to how many children are missing?
I guess we can end this right now. You guys want it? Sorry.
This is one of the biggest questions that the people of Lahaina have, but you don't want to answer it.
It always takes 1 or 2 to ruin it for everybody.
Please, this is our first
Well, we can say that about you. You ruined it for everybody. You're welcome to say it. You're the media. You can say whatever you want. You're a disaster. All right. Okay. Yeah, you've been the worst mayor we can possibly imagine. You won't even wait. Respect? Respect what? This is the most dismal response we ever had. You won't wait for your turn. You want to shout over these guys that are legit. Why don't you give them the real answers then? Give them the real answers.
That's not his question.
Yeah.
I don't think people understand how much property Oprah actually owns on the island of Maui. You look up pictures of the house and this is what you see. You see her house, a mansion with her guest house is also a mansion. But this doesn't tell the full story. Zoomed out on Google Earth, she has this exact division of property, almost 1,000 acres that she owns solely. One person owns this much property on someone else's sacred land. Nobody needs that. Her property has its own private road that only a few people can use. So when you go and you look at pictures of Oprah's house on Maui and you only see stuff like this, just know that's not her property. She owns 1,000 times more than what you're seeing. She bought all of that property somehow for $6.6 million. And if you go and you estimate the value of all that acreage now in Maui, it's over $300 million. So basically, she could sell a third of that land back to the people of Maui at full market price, which is still evil, and use that $100 million to give it back to the people of Maui. No one person needs that much property of any island. It's ridiculous.
Eyewitness accounts say that there was cop cars that were blocking the streets. What were they using to block the streets?
That's why I don't know what they were doing, like why they were blocked like that.
Not one car had moved, and I was wondering what was stopping the traffic. Well, it was a policeman, and I got to the end and I looked up north. There were no obstructions. There was no reason to keep those cars there.
Are you serious?
I'm serious as a heart attack. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I'm under orders to keep them here." And I said, "The fire is right around Safeway. It's going to hit Front Street. You know, these people got to get out of here." And he said, "I'm following orders."
No way.
I walked all the way to Waikuli Beach, still no cars coming out. And I started hearing boom, boom, boom. And then I heard people screaming and stuff.
You're saying they were blockaded in by the police at the end of Front Street?
Did you guys get that little news clip from President Biden when he was in Texas, referring to the roofs?
These areas that are burned to the ground, you'll see in the midst of 20 homes that are just totally destroyed, one home sitting there because it had the right roof on it.
Maui Fire's laser conspiracy test.
is unacceptable, but we, the people, have the power to change the country. Keep in mind, no siren went off in Maui to alert the people. This is the reality of America today, but somehow people will put Trump in a bullseye 3 times in a row because he wants, as he stated, to get this criminal government and organization arrested. Of course, Trump is not a genius. I know many of the reasons people dislike him, but like him or not, he is objectively the better man, and that's why he can be trusted. His threat, quote unquote, would have occurred while he was already in office if these Dems were ever truthful. So it's by pure possibility that you, in ignorance, might believe that it even sounds plausible. Personally, I'm looking forward to a future where we can have a conversation with the people who we decided would be fit to lead. There are a lot of good things on the way, so you should expect to see more of me, as I expect to see our country's problems slowly dissolve, with either a new administration or a whole new government if we need to get rid of these guys completely. I have no reason to leave. That said, like and subscribe so I don't have to scavenge New York for a burger. And stay safe, y'all. It's an evil world we live in. But hey, I'm going to keep on living and loving life.
I know the president has already outlined, our president, your boss, Joe Biden, has outlined plans to make it very difficult for those who cross into this country to continue doing so. I am wondering, though, isn't the better solution, and maybe it addresses what you're doing here, Secretary, to just shut down the border entirely, just lock it down? That's what Donald Trump wants to do. What do you say?
Well, you know, my concern today is with fentanyl trafficking, drug trafficking, and I'd say the
but if it's shut down, you know what I mean, Secretary? If it's shut down entirely, then there goes the trafficking, right?
Well, look, the most impactful tool we have is to put in place sophisticated drug detection equipment, and that's what President Biden has done. Is not to shut down the border entirely, but to greatly increase the number of drug detection units. And we've had a massive increase in the amount of drugs that have been detected and interdicted on the border.
You know, Secretary, I notice you're the one leading this charge. It's not Alejandro Mayorkas. I understand the financial tie-in here that would involve the Treasury Secretary of the United States and your ample, financial background as the former head of the Fed and all of that. But is it a sign that Alejandro Mayorkas is just damaged goods and they'd rather go to a more reliable, reputable cabinet official?
We each have a role to play. Fentanyl is really something that's caused a national crisis, and since 2000, more than 1 million people have lost their lives because of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids, and it's a human tragedy, and it's a top priority of President Biden to try to address that, and it's an all-of-government effort. We each have a role to play. Homeland Security plays a role, DEA, law enforcement. Treasury's unique capacity with respect to narcotic trafficking has to do with the money channels. Drug trafficking organizations or businesses, they need to receive money to invest the proceeds of their illegal activities and to make payments. And we have the ability to shut them off from the dollar-based financial system. So that's our specialty and where we come into the picture. We work with other agencies.
As Treasury Secretary.
Well, a disturbing development on the border crisis. Wait until you hear this. The Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirms that more than 13,000 illegal immigrants convicted of murder have been caught at the border and then released into the United States. The letter here tells the tale. Hello, I'm John Roberts in Washington. You believe this, Sandra?
Which means they are here, and this is just an unbelievable development. I'm Sandra Smith in New York. Good to be with you, John. This is America Reports. Let's get right to Bill Malugin. He's got this news for us. He's live out of Douglas, Arizona right now, where Vice President Kamala Harris is set to visit later this afternoon. Bill, the details of this news, what do you have?
And Sandra, bear with me. We just got these numbers moments ago, but it's a jaw dropper to say the least. So to set the stage here, let me just explain what these numbers mean. ICE has something called a non-detained docket. Essentially what that is it means migrants who were encountered by DHS but are no longer in federal custody. So who's on this non-detained docket? It's illegal immigrants who were caught and released at the border, released with the court date years away. They're in immigration proceedings, combined with illegal immigrants who have already been ordered, deported from the country by a judge, but are still here roaming the country. So keep that in mind, this non-detained docket. According to a letter that the acting director of ICE just sent to Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez, on ICE's non-detained docket, they're currently tracking 425,000 non-citizens who have been convicted of a crime. Of that number, over 13,000 non-citizens have convictions for homicide and are on the non-detained docket, meaning they're roaming the country right now. On top of that, there are another 15,811 non-citizens convicted of sexual assault who are roaming the country right now on ICE's non-detained docket. It doesn't stop there. Those are convictions. The ICE director also says there are currently just under 1,900 non-citizens on the non-detained docket who have pending homicide charges, who are roaming the country, and another 4,250 non-citizens who have pending sexual assault charges who are roaming the country on the non-detained docket. So people's eyes might be glazing over right now with all the numbers we just threw at you. Just to put it in a nutshell right here, what we've learned from the acting ICE director via this letter to Congressman Tony Gonzalez is right now there are over 13,000 illegal aliens convicted of homicide who are roaming the United States right now. There are another 15,811 illegal aliens roaming the country right now who have been convicted of sexual assault, and there are even more who are facing charges for homicide and charges for sexual assault. So this just goes to show, guys, the non-detained docket has exploded under the Biden administration to over, I believe it's 7.3 million. They're anticipating it could hit 8 million by the end of the year. But looking at the numbers on this letter right here, there are currently over 600,000 non-citizens on ICE's non-detained docket who are either convicted, 600,000 non-citizens on this non-detained docket who are roaming the country right now. Of that, 425,000 have already been convicted of crimes, 222,000 are pending crimes. And again, the most serious crimes we just told you about, over 13,000 convicted of homicide, over 15,000 convicted of sexual assault. And honestly, that is not a surprise to hear given these horrible headlines we keep seeing popping up in multiple parts of the country almost every day now of a horrible sexual assault or a murder or another violent felony committed by an illegal alien who is often caught and released from custody. And the jaw dropper here too, guys, is all these numbers we just rattled off, they don't even account for the nearly 2 million gotaways who have crossed our border under the Biden administration. Those almost 2 million gotaways, they were never encountered by DHS. They snuck in, they were never caught by Border Patrol, they were never encountered by ICE. There's no record of them, so they have nothing to do with the numbers I just rattled off to you. These are just the numbers of people that ICE has already encountered, that Border Patrol has encountered, that DHS knows who they are. And we just saw those horrible stories in Nantucket the other day. ICE ran a week-long operation in Nantucket, and in a single operation in a 48-hour span, they arrested 2 Salvadoran illegal aliens who came into the country as gotaways and were arrested for child rape on Nantucket. They got a Brazilian guy who was arrested for sexually assaulting a Nantucket resident, and then a Guatemalan guy who was previously deported who was arrested for sexually assaulting a Nantucket resident. So we keep seeing all these headlines about migrant crime popping up in different cities all over the country. This right here is the first time we have ever seen specific numbers as to who and what ICE is tracking when it comes to convicted criminals who have crossed the border at some point and are either supposed to be deported or are going through their immigration proceedings but are not in ICE custody right now and are roaming the country. So I'll ping it back to you guys, but some pretty jaw-dropping numbers that we are still going through as we speak right now.
So, Bill, this letter that was sent from the acting director of ICE to Congressman Tony Gonzalez of Texas, it responds to an inquiry that Gonzalez sent him back in March. I just talked to Gonzalez a moment ago, and he's going to be joining us at the top of our next hour. He's surprised that he ever heard back at all. But what's interesting is in this letter, the acting director says, quote, ICE recognizes that some jurisdictions are concerned that cooperating with federal immigration officials will erode trust with immigrant communities and make it harder for law enforcement to serve those populations. However, sanctuary policies can end up shielding dangerous criminals who often victimize those same communities. I mean, that would appear to be, from the acting director of ICE, a tacit acknowledgement here that sanctuary policies are endangering the public.
100%. And I talk to a lot of ICE contacts pretty much every single day, and that is their biggest frustration is all over the country there are these jurisdictions who simply will not cooperate with them, no matter how heinous the crime is. I mean, the Boston ICE office is arresting child rapists and these horrific sexual assaulters, and these local jurisdictions, ICE will put a detainer on them and basically say, hey, please hold them in custody, we'll send our guys and we'll pick them up. That way they don't get back into the community. The locals ignore ICE, ignore their detainers, and just release them back onto the streets, sometimes with a tiny bond, a few $1,000s for a child rape or an aggravated sexual assault. It makes ICE want to pull their hair out, and you did see that in the ICE director's letter. It is a head nod that, hey, we got to deal with a lot of sanctuary jurisdictions who will not cooperate with us for any reason. And when Kamala Harris visits the border today, if she takes any questions, I'm hoping she does. One of the things I'm hoping to ask her is, back in 2019, she campaigned for president as saying she wants to get rid of all ICE detainers, saying they tear families apart. You know, one of the biggest things we hear from ICE is there's this misconception about them that they're kicking in doors of grandmas and little kids and going after people who are just working and here for a better life. The people they're going after right now are the worst of the worst. We're talking serious felons, murderers, sexual assaulters, rapists, that sort of a thing. And when ICE detainers are not honored, and these local jurisdictions just release people back out onto the streets without notifying the feds, it's dangerous for everybody involved. It's dangerous for the local community who might have a sex predator back on their streets. It's dangerous for ICE because instead of having someone just handed over to the jail to them in a secure environment, now ICE has to use their resources to develop intel and try to find this guy and find out where he's going to be, and then use 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of their officers to go apprehend this guy who could be violent. Maybe they'll fight back. Maybe they won't want to go back into federal custody. So it's dangerous for everybody involved. In these sanctuary jurisdictions, you know, it's going to come to a point here soon. Donald Trump is vowing to end them. I had a phone call with him the other day. I said, well, how are you going to end them? What are you going to do? And he said, well, if it comes down to it, I'm going to strip federal funding away from sanctuary cities. I said, well, how far are you willing to go with that? Will you pull FEMA disaster money from them? He said, yes, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. We don't know where Kamala Harris stands on sanctuary cities right now. I'd love to ask her that today if she takes any questions. We'll find out later. But her running mate, Tim Walz, has advocated for pushing to have Minnesota become a sanctuary state in the past. So these are questions that Kamala Harris's campaign will have to answer about where she stands on sanctuary jurisdictions, detainers. She pledged to get rid of ICE detainers back in 2019. Where does she stand on that now? Has she flip-flopped on that like she has on some of her other border positions? Hopefully we get the chance to ask that, John.
All right, well, we're looking forward to that in the moments ahead. But just to recap the breaking news, more than 13,000 convicted criminals who crossed the border illegally have been, convicted murderers rather, who crossed the border illegally have been released into the United States. Almost 16,000 convicted of rape and sexual assault. Bill, great reporting. We look forward to what you have to tell us a little bit later on this afternoon.
You were the acting deputy director at DHS. Now, what is your reaction to hearing Mayorkas saying we're out of money, we need more money?
Look, in the Trump administration, it's called reprogramming. Reprogram money within the Department of Homeland Security, and there are conditions to it. But we reprogram money to stop illegal immigrants from coming in to the United States. They spent FEMA money, and they keep denying it, but it's on the FEMA website. They spent about $1 billion in the last year or two housing and transporting illegals in. So while the Trump administration was using what money it could scrape together to block illegal immigrants from coming in, the Biden and Harris administration has used FEMA dollars to pay them to come into the country. It is the exact opposite, and using taxpayer dollars. And now it sure would be nice to have that $1 billion available as Helene's destruction and the count just grows, not just, sadly, the death count, but also the property damage and the infrastructure damage that's going to need to be repaired in areas of the country that, frankly, don't have a lot of resilience.
Yeah, this is the devastation unimaginable. I want to just shift gears a little bit, though, and stay now on the border chaos, because I was reporting this week on a number of bombshell reports, the latest one out of the House Judiciary Committee that reports CBP has encountered more than 1.7 million special interest aliens. These are from countries like Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, with significant ties to terrorism. Your reaction?
My reaction is, and I know this is hard for Americans. We're all Americans. You and I are, everybody watching probably. This is going to hurt us for decades. Decades. We're going to be paying the price for this. Look at how long Hamas sat in wait before the October 7th attack on Israel last year. 17 years. They gathered up money international aid money, right, that was used not for aiding the people of Gaza, but to prepare for 17 years to strike as terrorists against Israel. Folks, that's who's coming into this country. Lots and lots of those folks are being invited in and let in by border czar Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden and incompetent Secretary Mayorkas. This is going to be deadly for years to come.
And we have reported previously on the fact that the number of individuals hitting that terror screening watch list up 3,300%. 11 for the Trump years, 382 under the Biden-Harris administration. Final word, how concerned should our officials be?
Look, even somebody like Christopher Wray has said this is one of the most dramatic national security threats that America has right now. And I agree with him on that. And it is a latent one. We're, again, we're Americans. We want to see the problem. This is a secret problem that this administration has allowed to grow like no one before them of either party. They are shattering records for letting evil, destructive, vicious people who hate America into this country. And we're going to pay a price for many years to come. It's very sad and it's very dangerous.
And I hope you are wrong, although it is very concerning indeed. Ken Cuccinelli, former acting DHS Deputy Secretary, thank you for your time.
Good to be with you.
So we're going to go talk to some smugglers. Are you nervous at all? I'm straight, bro. We'll be good. Another pair of shirt on, and we're ready to go. You put heads here. It's like 110 degrees outside. Where are a lot of these people coming from? Like, is there a specific Honduras? Everyone that goes over the door, does the cartel kind of have their hands in it in some way? Doing business with the cartel?